Deep within the heart of every family lies a thread that binds souls together across lifetimes and distances. Today, I am going to share a story that will not only touch your heart but might also change the way you look at the promises you keep. This is the journey of a bond so powerful that it defied the very laws of nature and time. Please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel so we can continue sharing these soulful journeys with you. You must stay with me until the very last word of this narrative to truly understand the spiritual lesson hidden within this miracle. Imagine a small, sun-drenched village where the air always smells of blooming jasmine and ancient dust. In this quiet corner of the world lived two siblings named Elias and Clara, who shared a connection deeper than words could ever express. Elias was the elder, a boy with eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of 1,000 years. He often told his younger sister that no matter where life took them, he would always be her protector. These were not just the playful words of a child but a sacred vow etched into the stars. The siblings spent their days exploring the golden fields and whispering secrets to the wind. Clara looked up to Elias as if he were a living shield against the sorrows of the world. He taught her how to find peace in the rustle of the leaves and how to listen to the silent language of the heart. Their bond was a lighthouse in a world that often felt vast and intimidating to a young girl. They promised each other that they would meet at the great oak tree every year, no matter what happened in their lives. However, the universe has a mysterious way of testing the strength of the promises we make in our youth. As the years passed, a shadow began to fall over their peaceful existence as a great unrest swept through the land. Families were being displaced, and the quiet rhythm of the village was replaced by the heavy footsteps of uncertainty. Elias knew that the time was coming when his promise to protect Clara would be put to the ultimate test. He held her hand tightly as they stood under their favorite tree, feeling the weight of the coming storm. One fateful evening, the sky turned a bruised purple, and the winds began to howl with a warning they couldn't ignore. The village elders spoke of a journey that everyone must take to find safety across the distant mountains. Elias looked at Clara and saw the flickering fear in her eyes, a reflection of the chaos surrounding them. He leaned in and whispered that he would never let the darkness touch her soul. But as they prepared to leave, a sudden and violent separation tore through the crowd, leaving them reaching for hands that were no longer there. Clara found herself swept away by a tide of people, her screams for her brother lost in the roaring wind. She reached out into the void, but the warmth of Elias's hand had been replaced by the biting cold of the night. For days she wandered through the mist, her heart heavy with a grief she could not name. She remembered his face and the way he looked at her with such unwavering certainty. Just as she felt her strength fading, she saw a flicker of a shadow in the distance that looked hauntingly familiar. Was it possible that Elias was already waiting for her in the silence of the forest? She pushed through the dense undergrowth, her breath coming in ragged gasps as hope fought against her exhaustion. The figure moved with a grace that felt almost otherworldly, leading her deeper into the unknown. Just as she reached out to touch the hem of the traveler's cloak, the figure vanished into thin air. Clara stood alone in a clearing, realizing that the path ahead was far more treacherous than she had ever imagined. The silence of the woods was heavy, filled with the unspoken prayers of a sister lost in the wild. She sat by a small stream, watching the water flow over smooth stones, wondering if life was just as fluid and fleeting. Every rustle of a leaf felt like a footstep, and every whisper of the wind sounded like her brother calling her name. She realized that the physical world was starting to blur with the realm of her memories and dreams. As the moon rose, she saw a light glowing from a cave nearby that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. Clara approached the light with a mixture of reverence and trembling fear, wondering what she would find inside. The cave was filled with ancient carvings that depicted stories of souls finding their way back to one another. It felt as though the very walls were breathing, vibrating with a frequency that calmed her shattered nerves. In the center of the chamber sat an old woman who looked as though she was made of moonlight and silver thread. The woman looked up and smiled, as if she had been waiting for Clara for an eternity. The old woman spoke in a voice that sounded like the humming of the earth itself, telling Clara that promises are golden chains. She explained that when a soul makes a vow with pure intent, it creates a bridge that even death cannot burn. Clara felt a surge of warmth in her chest, a spark of the fire that Elias had always carried within him. The woman told her that to find her brother, she must first find the strength he left behind in her own spirit. But just as the woman began to reveal the location of the hidden path, the candle between them flickered and died. In the sudden darkness, Clara felt a cold breeze that didn't belong in the sheltered cave. She heard a faint rhythmic tapping like a cane striking stone, echoing from the tunnels deep behind her. Fear gripped her, but she remembered her brother's voice telling her that fear is only a shadow looking for a light. She stood up, guiding herself by the feel of the cold stone walls, moving toward the sound that beckoned her. As she rounded a corner, she saw a reflection in a pool of water that made her heart stop in her chest. The reflection wasn't her own, but that of a young man standing directly behind her in the shadows. She turned around quickly, but there was no one there, only the vast and empty silence of the cavern. Her mind began to race, wondering if she was losing her grip on reality or if the spiritual world was bleeding into her own. She called out his name, a desperate plea that echoed through the stone ribs of the mountain. Far off in the distance, a voice answered back, but it sounded like 1,000 voices speaking in unison. Clara followed the sound, her feet moving with a purpose she hadn't felt since the day they were separated. The mountain seemed to open up before her, leading her toward a high peak that touched the very hem of the heavens. She climbed until her fingers bled and her lungs burned with the thin, freezing air of the heights. At the summit, she found a small altar made of white stones, identical to the ones Elias used to collect. Resting on the altar was a single fresh jasmine flower. Despite the freezing temperatures of the peak, she picked up the flower, and as she did, a vision flooded her mind with the intensity of a summer storm. She saw Elias standing in a place of light, looking down at a world that seemed small and fragile. He was and whispered to her through the petals of the flower, telling her that the promise was being kept even now. He told her that he had found a way to be her guardian in a way she could never have imagined. But before he could explain the nature of his presence, the vision shattered into a million fragments of light. Clara fell to her knees, the cold wind whipping her hair around her face as she clutched the flower to her heart. She felt a presence beside her, a warmth that shielded her from the biting frost of the mountain top. It was as if an invisible cloak had been draped over her shoulders, smelling of home and safety. She realized then that her brother had not just been looking for her, but had been guiding her steps all along. However, the path back down the mountain was now obscured by a thick, unnatural fog that seemed to swallow the world. As she descended through the mist, she encountered a traveler who seemed to be wandering without a destination. The man was tall and carried a heavy burden on his back, his face hidden by a wide-brimmed hat. He offered to walk with her, claiming that the fog was filled with spirits who had forgotten their own names. Clara felt a strange unease in his presence, yet there was something about his gait that reminded her of the stories her brother told. They walked in silence for hours, the world around them reduced to a small circle of gray light. The traveler began to speak of a brother who had given everything to ensure his sister's passage to a better land. He spoke with such detail that Clara felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the weather. He described the way Elias used to tie his shoes and the specific way he laughed when he was nervous. Clara stopped in her tracks and demanded to know how a stranger could know such intimate details of her life. The man turned toward her, and as the wind caught his hat, she saw a face that was a twisted mask of her brother's features. She recoiled in horror, realizing that this was not her brother, but a manifestation of her own grief and longing. The figure began to dissolve into the mist, laughing with a sound that cracked like breaking ice. It told her that the Elias she knew was gone, and only the promise remained as a hollow echo in the wind. Clara stood trembling, her faith shaken to its very core as the darkness of the fog closed in. She felt a sudden sharp tug on her sleeve, pulling her away from the edge of a hidden precipice. It was a small dog, one that looked exactly like the stray they had fed back in their home village. The animal barked with a frantic energy, urging her to follow it away from the mocking voices of the mist. She ran after the creature, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. The dog led her to a small hut nestled in a valley that the fog seemed unable to enter. Inside the hut, the air was warm and filled with the scent of baking bread and dried herbs. An old man sat by the fire, his eyes clouded with age but bright with an inner light that seemed to glow. He invited her to sit and share his meal, telling her that many travelers get lost in the fog of their own sorrow. He explained that the image she saw in the mist was a test of her discernment and her devotion. The old man said that a promise made in love can never be mimicked by the shadows of the world. He promised to show her the truth of her brother's fate if she could survive the night without falling into sleep. Clara fought against the heavy weight of exhaustion, her eyelids feeling like lead as the fire crackled in the hearth. The old man told her stories of the stars and how they are the campfires of the souls who have crossed over. She felt her consciousness drifting, seeing flashes of Elias standing by a great river of silver water. Every time she began to nod off, the small dog would lick her hand or bark softly to pull her back. As the first light of dawn touched the window, the old man stood up and pointed toward the eastern horizon. He told her that the final leg of her journey would require her to cross the river of remembrance. This was not a river of water, but a flow of consciousness that held every memory of every soul that ever lived. He warned her that many who enter the river become lost in the beauty of the past and never return to the present. To find Elias, she would have to focus only on the promise and nothing else. Clara thanked the old man and stepped out into the crisp morning air, ready to face the final mystery. She reached the banks of the shimmering river and saw that it was filled with colors that don't exist in the waking world. As she stepped into the flow, she was hit by a wave of memories that felt as real as the skin on her arms. She saw her mother's smile, the taste of her favorite childhood fruit, and the sound of the village bells. It was a seductive pull, inviting her to stay forever in the safety of what used to be. But she closed her eyes and visualized the golden thread of the promise Elias had made to her. Suddenly, the river became turbulent, and the peaceful memories turned into a chaotic whirlpool of emotions. She felt herself being pulled under, the weight of 1,000 lives pressing down on her chest. In the depths of the water, she saw a hand reaching down toward her, glowing with a steady golden light. She reached out and grasped it, feeling a surge of power that shattered the illusions of the river. She was pulled upward, gasping for air, and found herself lying on the opposite bank under a familiar tree. It was the great oak tree from their childhood, standing tall and proud in a land that felt both new and ancient. Standing beneath its branches was Elias, but he was no longer the boy she remembered from the village. He looked radiant, his presence filling the space with a peace that surpassed all understanding. He smiled at her, and in that moment, she understood that he had fulfilled his promise in the highest way possible. He had become her spiritual guide, a bridge between the physical and the eternal realms of the soul. Elias explained that his physical departure was necessary for him to protect her in ways a human body never could. He had been the voice in the wind, the light in the cave, and the strength in her own weary muscles. The promise was not about staying physically present, but about the eternal commitment of one soul to another. He told her that she was never truly alone, and that every challenge she faced was a lesson in her own divinity. Clara felt a profound sense of closure and an opening of a new, spiritual chapter in her life. The story of Elias and Clara reminds us that the bonds we form in love are the only things we truly take with us. When you make a promise from the heart, you are weaving a fabric that covers the nakedness of the soul. No distance is too great, and no barrier is too high for a love that has been sanctified by a selfless vow. I hope this journey has brought you a sense of peace and a reminder of the unseen guardians in your own life. May you always walk in the light of the promises you keep and the love that surrounds you.